So as you look back on all these years of ministry and you think about all that God's done, and you think about the Israelites who would tell the story to the next generation.
Yeah.
And I know you got grandkids that you love dearly. What are some of those faith stories that you're telling to the next generation from your ministry?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. We literally just came back from a cruise with a bunch of our grandkids. And so we tried to spend time with each of them and each family. And so one night with one of our families, my daughter asked me, said, Dad, tell them stories about. And she asked specifically about certain stories because she lived through many of those stories. And so we're trying to do that, and we're trying to journal some of that to put it in writing as well. But I found something fascinating. These kids love these stories.
Amen.
And they'll ask for them again and again, and so we're telling them about how God provided for us when we were in seminary and we didn't have, 2 dimes to rub together, and how God would just show up when you were in the most desperate stage. We told them these stories about our churches, and we want our children to not only love the Lord, but love His church.
Amen.
And it gets me when people say, well, I love the Lord, but I don't need His church. It's like saying I love you, but I don't care much for your bride. It's His bride. He died for this church. He established the church. Matthew 16 Himself, He said, upon this rock I will build my church. He identified with it. He's coming again to receive it. And when people say, I just don't need the church, they're basically saying, I don't need you. And I want my children to love the church. We don't worship the church. We worship the head of the church, but we do it in context of community. And so we're trying to tell those stories. I'm actually trying to write some of those down. I can't write them. They couldn't read them. They can't do my handwriting. I'm trying to type them and print them out. But yeah, that was a part of this cruise that we took, is just to tell the stories. And it's been interesting. Then my daughter says, Dad, tell them that story. And so my children are hearing it. They know it, or they lived through it, and they're wanting their children to hear it. So I think that's an important part. I think one of the things we're missing in church, by the way, is testimonies.
Amen.
I grew up during when we used to have 2 revivals a year, whether we needed them or not. And I could not tell you a single name of one of the pastors my dad had in the preacher revival. And I never thought any of them were as good a preacher as my dad. That's prejudice on my part. But I do remember a lot of those laymen's testimony. When somebody would get up, that was my Sunday school teacher or whatever, and tell the story of his salvation, that's telling those mighty deeds. You read the Old Testament. We're working through right now in our church through the Bible in a year as part of our Sunday school curriculum even. And how many times do you find the story of the Red Sea redemption?
Quite a bit.
It is all over the place. It's all over the Psalm. It's over and over and over again. And so if God kept telling people to tell His story over and over again, we need to do it. One of the things I did at First Norfolk on a regular basis, I had a State of the Union message every January. And what I tried to do was to go back generations to tell stories of pastors before me. And the church burned to the ground downtown, and the pastor before me had to relocate that church. I would never have had the patience to do that. Now, the church grew excessively under my leadership, and that's how I'm geared. But I wanted to say the guy that had the patience and courage to move it out here, that's the foundation I built on.
Right.
And the guy before that, established the church. So, I think it's important that our children have the same understanding of how God's worked in our life.
Exactly.
And I think it's important for churches to be able to celebrate that, to tell that story. How many churches know their own church history?
Right.
There's some great stories in those books.
But they don't know them.
No.